The security lights along the path hummed softly as Jake Miller walked the narrow gravel line toward the big cat enclosures. It was almost midnight, the kind of cold Colorado night that made the metal railings sting if you grabbed them barehanded. Above him, the sky was clear, stars sharp as glass. Down here, Rock Creek Wildlife Sanctuary was quiet, a silence so complete it felt like it had weight. At the far end of the row, in the largest habitat, lay the quietest animal Jake had ever known, Coda. The Bengal tiger's massive orange and black body was stretched out on his wooden platform, head turned toward the distant hills, eyes open but unfocused. For 730 days, Jake had done this same walk at this same time and seen almost the same picture. Coda breathing, eating when food appeared, moving when he had to, but never roaring, never growling, never answering when the wind carried the faint calls of other cats. 2 full years without a sound. Jake checked the locks out of habit, shining his flashlight along the gates. In the beam, Coda's whiskers glowed white. The tiger didn't flinch. He never did. Trauma, the vet called it. Severe psychological shutdown. If Coda had been a person, they'd have sent him straight to intensive mental health care or online therapy. Out here, they had softer straw, safer walls, enrichment toys, and constant monitoring. Animal rescue for a soul that didn't seem to want to be rescued. Jake exhaled, seeing his breath cloud in the air, and turned to leave. Then something small and gray twitched between Coda's front paws. He froze. For a second, his mind refused to connect the shapes. 2 enormous paws, thick with fur and muscle, and nestled in the warm hollow between them, no bigger than the tiger's head, was a tiny gray kitten, curled into a perfect comma of sleep. Jake's flashlight trembled. The kitten's belly rose and fell in quick, light breaths. One ear flicked. It was so close to Coda's scarred chest that when the tiger's ribs moved, the kitten's whole body lifted. "Jesus," Jake whispered. His first instinct was pure panic. Hit the radio, call for a tranquilizer gun, do anything. Pet insurance, life insurance, none of that meant a thing if 150 kilos of predator remembered what he was. But Coda wasn't looking at the kitten like prey. Slowly, as if waking from a years-long dream, the tiger lowered his great head. His gold eyes slid away from the dark hills and down to the little gray bundle between his paws. For a long heartbeat, he simply watched. His pupils were calm, not the wide black coins Jake had seen in hunting footage. No tension in the shoulders, no gathering of power in the haunches. Just awareness. Then Coda did something no one at Rock Creek had heard since the night they unloaded him from the transport truck 2 years ago. He breathed out, a deep, low huff that rolled through the air like a distant drum. Not a roar, not a warning, but a soft, throaty sound Jake had only ever heard in wildlife conservation documentaries. Mother tigers comforting their cubs. The kitten twitched, shifted, and snuggled closer into his chest. Jake's throat tightened. There were emergency protocols to follow, of course. Safety briefings, liability forms, all the careful precautions that kept Rock Creek open and honest in a world that watched every move on social media. But right then, framed in the glow of the security lights, he saw something no risk assessment could measure. A broken animal choosing, for the first time in 730 nights, not to turn away. If stories like this, quiet, impossible moments where a life turns back toward the light, help you breathe a little easier at the end of the day, you're in the right place. This is Whispering Hearts, where we share the small miracles that happen when we give animals a second chance. Take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next between this silent tiger and the tiny kitten sleeping between his paws. Jake tightened his grip on the flashlight, forced himself to breathe, and reached for his radio. Because whatever this was, whatever had just cracked open inside Kitten, it was only the beginning. Long before a gray kitten ever found his way between those paws, Kotte's world had been nothing but noise. Not the good kind either. Not wind in the trees or kids laughing. His life had been engines and generators, metal banging on metal, the crack of whips, pop music blasting from cheap speakers. The traveling circus had moved from state to state, following fairgrounds and empty parking lots, and Kitten had followed with it, locked in a steel box that smelled of bleach, gasoline, and fear. Emma Carter, the director of Rock Creek, hadn't seen any of that with her own eyes. She'd seen it later, on a shaky phone video taken by a woman in the front row. A young Bengal tiger, still lanky with growing bones, pushed through a flaming hoop while a trainer shouted and snapped a stick against the ground. The crowd cheered. Somewhere off camera, a child asked if tigers came with pet insurance the way dogs did, as if this were just another show, just another product. The video cut off before the worst night. That came on a cold stretch of highway when the circus convoy hit black ice. The truck carrying the big cats jackknifed, trailers slamming sideways into a concrete barrier. Steel cages tore loose like tin cans. One sparked against the pavement, and fire licked up through the gaps, feeding on straw and fur and old sawdust. By the time highway patrol stopped traffic and animal rescue charities were called in, one cage was nothing but char, and the tiger inside, Sasha, according to the paperwork, was gone. The second cage, twisted but intact, held a young male tiger pressed so far into the back corner he looked like a shadow. He didn't scream, he didn't roar. He just stared. Rock Creek took him in under an emergency wildlife grant and whatever Emma could pull from the sanctuary's small emergency fund. Dr. Noah Reed handled the initial veterinary care, x-rays, blood work, pain relief. Physically, Kitten healed better than anyone expected. No broken bones, just burns on his chest where the metal had been hottest, and a ragged scar along his flank. Emotionally, it was another story. For months, Emma, Noah, and their team tried everything they could think of. Puzzle feeders, scent trails, big hanging toys that other tigers knocked around with joy. Gentle routines, soft voices, even soft background music they'd read could reduce animal stress, the kind some people play instead of paying for expensive online counseling. Kitten ate, he walked when he had to. He lay on his platform and watched the mountains. And he made no sound. When Emma finally brought in a behavior specialist, Dr. Elaine Morris, the woman watched him for 3 days straight. On the last afternoon, she stood beside Emma at the viewing glass. "His body's here," Elaine said quietly. "But whatever made him a tiger, that's shut down. You may not get it back." That was a year before a tiny gray kitten slipped through a vent and rewrote every prediction they had ever made.
2 weeks before a gray kitten ever curled between Kotte's paws, Rock Creek's front gate camera caught a different kind of visitor. It was just past sunrise on a Sunday, the sky still pink over the pines, when Marcus, the night guard, noticed something odd on his monitor. A plastic laundry basket sat just outside the main gate, shoved up against the chain link as if someone had pushed it there and run. No cars in sight, no person walking away down the road, just that basket and a thin trail of steam rising from someone's breath in the cold air a minute earlier. Marcus sighed. He'd seen this before with dogs and even the occasional iguana. People loved animals until rent went up, until the car broke down, until the vet said surgery, and the numbers sounded bigger than their mortgage payment. When you're juggling credit card debt and health insurance premiums, a sick animal can feel like the last straw. He zipped his jacket, stepped out into the chill, and walked to the gate. Up close, he could see the basket was lined with an old flannel shirt. The sleeves were wrapped around a tiny gray shape curled in the middle. "Hey there, little guy," Marcus murmured. The kitten lifted its head, eyes the color of late summer hay blinking up at him. No hissing, no shrinking into the fabric. It meowed, loud, complaining, as if to say, "What took you so long?" There was a folded piece of notebook paper taped to the handle. Marcus peeled it off with stiff fingers and read the shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I lost my job. I can't keep him. Please give him a better life than I can." No name, no phone number, just that. Marcus swallowed, tucked the note into his pocket, and lifted the basket carefully. The kitten climbed instantly toward his hands, tiny claws hooking into his sleeve as if the whole world were one big climbing gym. Inside the medical building, Dr. Noah was already shrugging into his white coat when Marcus came through the door. "Another drop-off?" Noah asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Yeah, Kitten. Whoever left him, they tried at least." On the exam table, the little gray bundle became a whirlwind. He marched straight to the edge, sniffed Noah's stethoscope, and tried to chew it. Noah laughed in spite of himself. "Heart sounds good," he said, lifting the kitten and pressing the cold bell gently to its chest. "Lungs clear. A few scratches, a bit underweight, but nothing serious. Somebody handled him. He's no feral." Jake appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. "Who's the new troublemaker?" he asked. The kitten turned, fixed those gold eyes on Jake, and let out a chirping meow before launching himself toward him. Jake had barely time to get his hands up before tiny paws hit his chest and a small body scrambled up to his shoulder, settling there like it was the most natural perch in the world. Jake huffed a laugh. "Well, he's not shy." Noah smiled. "Looks like you've been claimed." Jake glanced at Emma, who had come in silently behind him, coffee in hand. "He needs a name," she said. Jake reached up, steadying the kitten as it tried to bat at his ear. "Milo," he decided. "Feels like a Milo to me." The kitten purred in agreement as if the matter were settled. They didn't know it yet, standing in that bright, ordinary exam room with the smell of disinfectant and coffee and canned cat food, but the tiny gray stray who treated every stranger like a friend had just walked into the life of the quietest animal on the property, and nothing at Rock Creek would ever be quite the same.
They set Milo up in one of the small quarantine rooms off the medical wing, a glass-fronted box meant for new arrivals and short-term patients. The space wasn't fancy, metal cage, fleece blanket, a couple of toys, litter pen, but compared to a laundry basket on the side of a road, it was a palace, warm, safe, predictable. The kind of place people hope for when they talk about good health care or picking the right insurance plan for their families. Milo treated it like a hotel room he fully intended to rearrange. Within an hour, he'd climbed the bars, batted his water dish, and somehow managed to drag the old fleece blanket halfway up the side of the cage, turning it into a makeshift hammock. When Jake passed by on his afternoon rounds, the kitten was hanging upside down from the blanket, swatting lazily at dust motes in the sunlight. "Dangerous little acrobat," Jake said, smiling in spite of himself. "New guy keeping you busy?" a voice asked behind him. He turned to see Maya Singh, the latest intern from the local community college, clipboard in hand and dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. She'd grown up in Denver, working part-time in a vet clinic, and spoke about animals the way some people spoke about retirement planning or home insurance. Calm, practical, always thinking 5 steps ahead. "Meet Milo," Jake said. "He thinks gravity is just a suggestion." Maya stepped closer to the glass. Milo spotted her, dropped to the floor, and trotted straight toward them, tiny paws pattering on the metal. He pressed his nose to the glass, then sat down and stared, as if he fully expected the humans to produce snacks. "Oh," Maya breathed. "Well, you're not afraid of much, are you?" Dr. Noah came down the hall, flipping through a chart. "Quarantine protocol," he reminded them. 14 days, no outside visitors, no contact with the big cat wing, and for the love of all things good, don't prop any doors." "Got it," Maya said. "I've read the manual twice." "Read it a third time," Noah replied, but his tone was gentle.
And keep an eye on that top vent. Maintenance swapped out the grill last week. I want to be sure it's seated right. Last thing we need is a Houdini kitten." After he left, Maya made a note on her clipboard, then looked up. Milo wasn't watching her anymore. He was sitting in the back corner, head tipped, eyes locked not on the humans, but on the ceiling, on the square of metal slats where the warm air sighed out of the old ventilation system. Jake followed his gaze and frowned. "Don't get any ideas, buddy," he said through the glass. "This place is safer than anything you'll find out there." If either of them had looked closer at the vent, they might have noticed the slight gap at one corner, the shiny new screws not quite tightened all the way. But the kitten just blinked slowly, as if filing the information away. 14 days, they thought. Just 2 quiet weeks, then an easy transfer to an adoption group. They had no idea Milo's plans were already running miles ahead of theirs.
It was a little after 9 on a Tuesday when Maya realized something was wrong. She just finished logging the day's medication doses, the kind of slow, careful paperwork that made her feel like one of those folks who actually read all the fine print in their health insurance policy. Numbers tidy, boxes checked, she headed down the hallway toward Milo's quarantine room, already picturing him plastered against the glass, demanding attention. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Maya flicked on the overhead light. The metal cage door was latched exactly as she'd left it. The food bowl sat half full, the fleece blanket a rumpled heap. The litter pan had fresh paw marks. But the cage itself was empty. "Milo?" Her voice sounded thin in the tiled room. She checked under the blanket, behind the litter pan, in the corner where he liked to pounce on his own tail. Nothing. The glass front was untouched, no smudges at nose height, the lower vent by the floor was intact. Her gaze climbed to the ceiling. The square vent above the cage looked almost the same as it had the week before. Same dull metal, same slats. But now, in the upper left corner, one edge sagged just enough to cast a crooked shadow. One screw gleamed silver against the older, darker metal. "Please don't tell me you did what I think you did," she whispered. She hit the alarm button by the door. Down the hall, a soft chime sounded at the main desk, followed by the buzz of the internal radio. Within minutes, Emma, Jake, and Marcus were in the room, heads tilted back, staring at the vent. "He can't have gotten far. He's tiny," Emma said. "Tiny doesn't mean helpless," Jake replied. "You ever see what a mouse can do inside a wall?" They split up quickly. Marcus took the outer perimeter, scanning the security cameras for any flicker of gray in the parking lot. Emma checked every office, storage closet, and supply room, opening cabinet doors like a homeowner checking basement corners after a storm. Jake and Maya followed the line of vents, listening for the faintest scratch. Outside, the temperature was dropping fast. The forecast had warned of frost, the kind that made folks worry about busted pipes and higher heating bills. A 10-pound barn cat might shrug it off. A half-grown kitten who'd spend his short life indoors? Not so much. By 10 o'clock, they'd checked the education center, the bird mews, the small mammal wing. No paw prints, no tufts of gray fur. Just the steady, cold wind and the soft hum of the generators that kept Rock Creek's systems running as reliably as a good home insurance policy. Jake was about to suggest widening the search into the tree line when his radio crackled. "Jake? Emma?" Sam's voice came through, tight and thin. Sam was the night keeper for the big cats, not the type to spook easily. "I'm here," he answered. "Go ahead." There was a pause, a breath. "You're going to want to get down to Coda's enclosure, now. There's something small and gray inside his habitat." Jake was already moving before Sam finished his sentence. The radio crackled at his hip as he hit the back door at a run, boots pounding the concrete, breath burning cold in his chest. Maya was right behind him, shorter legs scrambling to keep up. The big cat row loomed ahead, tall fencing and floodlights cutting the night into hard-edged shapes. Most folks only ever saw places like this in glossy wildlife documentaries or charity ads wedged between life insurance commercials on late-night TV. Up close, in the dark, it felt very different, more like a small town hanging onto its power grid in the middle of a snowstorm, every system counting. Sam was waiting by Koda's viewing window, face pale in the bluish light of the monitors. He didn't say a word, just pointed. Jake stepped up to the glass. At first, he saw only Koda, the same way he'd seen him 1,000 times, stretched out on the raised concrete platform, broad head angled toward the hills, that burn scar across his chest, a darker stripe in the orange fur. Then the beam of his flashlight slid lower, and the breath went out of him. There, nestled in the warm hollow between the tiger's front paws, lay Milo. The kitten was on his side, tiny spine curved, paws tucked close as if he were back in his laundry basket bed. His fur rose and fell in quick, trusting breaths. His face was pressed so close to Koda's chest that when the tiger inhaled, it looked as if Milo's whole body lifted. "Dear God," Maya whispered. Every training Jake had ever sat through flashed through his mind at once. Emergency drills, incident reports, the section of the sanctuary's liability insurance policy that spelled out what would happen if a guest ever saw something go horribly wrong. A single swipe of that paw, a reflexive grab, and there wouldn't be time for a tranquilizer or a vet or a second chance. "Is he breathing?" Sam murmured. "Both of them are," Jake said, amazed that his voice sounded steady. Koda's eyes were open. That alone was strange. Most nights at this hour, he was deep in the kind of sleep that didn't care about passing headlights or rustling trees. Now his gold gaze was not on the mountains, not on the sky, but on the small gray body between his paws. The tiger blinked slowly. No flare of the nostrils, no focused stare at the kitten's neck or belly. His pupils stayed the soft evening size Jake had learned to read as calm. His shoulders were loose. His tail lay still along the platform, the tip curled just enough to brush Milo's back, like an accidental blanket. "Where's Emma?" Jake asked. "She's on her way. She was on a call. I told her this couldn't wait." As if hearing his name in some language only tigers know, Koda shifted. The great head turned a fraction, muscles rippling under the striped fur. For the first time in 2 years, since the wreck and the fire and the cage that smelled like death, he moved for a reason that wasn't food or routine. He lowered his face toward the kitten. Milo didn't startle. One ear twitched at the soft rush of breath, and he snuggled closer, pressing his nose into the thick fur over Koda's scar. The tiger's whiskers brushed over him like fine wires. Then Koda exhaled. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a growl. It was a low, rolling huff, a breathy sound that fogged the cool air and vibrated faintly against the glass where Jake's hand rested. He'd heard that sound once before on a wildlife rescue video about tiger conservation, labeled as a chuff, a friendly greeting, a mother's reassurance to a cub. Milo's paws flexed in his sleep. His body relaxed even more if that were possible. Behind Jake, Maya swallowed hard. "He's comforting him," she said. Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. For 730 days, Koda had chosen silence, had turned his back on every enrichment toy, every gentle word thrown at the gaping hole in his life. Tonight, he had broken that silence, not with anger, not with fear, with a sound meant to tell a tiny, reckless kitten, "You're safe here." Emma arrived at a half run, her hair pulled back, phone still in her hand. One look through the glass and the color drained from her face. For a few seconds, she was just another person staring at something her brain refused to file anywhere sensible. A battle-scarred tiger and a shelter kitten resting together, like they'd known each other all their lives. Then, the director in her kicked in. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "How long has he been like this?" 10 minutes that we know of," Jake answered. We picked him up on the cameras when Sam radioed. No aggression. He chuffed at him. Twice. Vitals? Emma asked automatically, then caught herself. Right. We can't exactly get those. Dr. Noah trotted up a moment later, glasses fogged from the cold outside. He took one look and swore under his breath, then pressed closer to the glass, studying Koda's eyes, the set of his jaw, the rise and fall of his chest. Pupils normal, he murmured. No fixed stare, no tension in the shoulders, breathing steady. If this were a video consultation, I'd say he's relaxed. Relaxed with a snack in his lap, Maya said, voice cracking. Noah shook his head. If he saw that kitten as food, he wouldn't be this loose. He'd be focused, coiled. That, he nodded toward the platform, is not a hunting posture. Emma rubbed the bridge of her nose. Options. Now. We trank Koda, Jake said. Get the kitten out, separate them, end of story. It's the safest move for the cat, for us, for the lawyers, for our liability insurance, for everyone. And for him? Emma asked softly, eyes still on Koda. What does it do to him? There was a long pause. Outside, the wind rattled the fencing. Inside, Koda shifted slightly, tightening his paws around Milo in a way that looked a lot like a person pulling a blanket closer. For 2 years, he hasn't reacted to anything. No toys, no scent work, no nothing. Tonight, he's choosing to respond to a living creature, and he's doing it with what looks like care, not aggression. If we knock him out and rip that away, we may not get this window again. Maya swallowed. If he changes his mind in the middle of the night, that kitten doesn't get a second chance. Emma knew exactly what was on the line. One photo taken at the wrong second, one clip online, and they wouldn't just be explaining themselves to local supporters. They'd be facing people who'd never set foot in Colorado, but had strong opinions from their couches between home insurance ads and talk shows. She watched as Koda bent his head once more, breath stirring Milo's fur. The kitten shifted, let out a tiny sigh, and stayed asleep. All right, we don't trank, not yet. We increase monitoring. Noah, I want a dart ready. Jake, Sam, you're on rotation here all night. If his body language changes, if anything shifts toward predatory, we act. And the kitten? Maya asked. Emma's voice softened. We trust him for one night. The same way we want people to trust us when we say we're doing everything we can for these animals. Sometimes, like choosing a doctor or planning for retirement, there's no perfect guarantee. There's just the best judgment you have in the moment. She laid her palm flat against the glass, inches from Koda's great head. Let's see what he does with it.
The wind picked up as the night deepened, sliding down off the Rockies and rattling every loose bit of metal on the property. Out by the Big Cat Row, the fence lines hummed softly, a low, constant note beneath the occasional clatter of a swinging latch. Inside the control room, the only light came from monitors and a single dim lamp over the logbook. Jake sat in front of the main screen, eyes fixed on the camera feed from Koda's habitat. In grainy gray, the platform filled most of the frame. Koda was a darker, solid shape. Milo was a little comma of pale fur between his paws. "Anything?" Sam asked, setting a mug of coffee down within reach. "Just breathing," Jake said, "but that's more than we had yesterday." They watched in silence for a while. On the monitor, a gust of wind stirred the pine branches at the edge of the habitat. A few leaves skidded across the ground. Koda's ears twitched, but he did not lift his head. His attention, if you could call it that, stayed anchored on the small warmth tucked against his chest. Around 1 in the morning, Milo shifted. The kitten stretched in his sleep, tiny legs pushing outward, and suddenly he wasn't nestled safely anymore. He rolled slowly toward the edge of the platform. Jake's hand shot toward the radio. "Come on, big guy, do something." Koda did. In one smooth motion, without the sharp snap of a predator strike, the tiger bent his head and nudged Milo back with his nose. The contact was so gentle, it barely moved the kitten's fur. But it was enough. Milo rolled back into the hollow space between Koda's forelegs and settled there, breathing fast, oblivious. Sam let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's not hunting," he said quietly. "That's making sure the kid doesn't fall out of bed." Outside, the wind howled and then dropped, like a storm front changing its mind. In the glow of the monitors, Jake thought about all the things people try to plan for: mortgage rates, health insurance, their 401k, and how none of them could ever promise a moment like this, a silent agreement between a broken-hearted tiger and a stray nobody wanted. Near 3 in the morning, Koda shifted again, drawing his paws in closer, his great body curving protectively around the kitten. For the first time since he'd come to Rock Creek, he turned his back fully on the mountains and faced inward toward the small life pressed under his chin. On the screen, Milo's sides rose and fell, faster than Koda's slow, steady breaths. 2 rhythms, out of sync, but somehow together, echoing softly in the cold, restless night. By the time the first gray of dawn brushed the mountains, the wind had calmed and frost had silvered the grass along the paths. Emma came back to the viewing window with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a headache starting at the base of her skull. She'd slept maybe an hour in a chair, the kind of broken rest that never really counts no matter what your fitness tracker claims. "Status?" she asked quietly. "Uneventful," Jake said, in the best possible way. On the platform inside the habitat, Koda was still there, still curved around the small gray shape between his paws. The scene looked almost staged, the kind of photo you'd expect to see on a charity's homepage, between articles about estate planning and life insurance, something designed to tug at hearts and wallets. Except this wasn't staged. Emma had watched enough hours of footage to know there was no trick here. As the sky turned from gray to pale blue, Milo woke first. It happened all at once. A twitch of whiskers, a big kitten yawn, a stretch that sent his front paws reaching up into Koda's chest fur. Then he rolled onto his belly, blinked around as if trying to remember where he was, and let out a small, questioning meow. Koda lifted his head. The tiger's eyes met the kitten's for a long, still second. Then he gave that same soft, breathy huff. Milo's ears flicked forward. He bumped his head against Koda's scarred chest in what could only be called a greeting, then hopped down off the platform, landing a bit awkwardly on the packed earth below. "That's our chance," Noah said from behind Emma. "Let's see if food can do what common sense could not." Jake moved to the side door, where a narrow feeding slot opened into the habitat. He slid in a shallow dish piled with warm, fragrant kitten food, the good stuff they used to tempt picky eaters. The smell drifted out, rich and savory. Milo's head snapped around. He trotted toward the dish, tail up, posture all curiosity and appetite. He reached it, bent his head, and sniffed. Then he stopped. Slowly he turned and looked back up at the platform. Koda was watching. Not the food, not the humans at the glass, but Milo. The tiger's body stayed relaxed, but his attention was clear and steady, the way you'd watch someone you were afraid of losing in a crowd. Koda huffed again, just once, a low, soft sound that rolled across the distance between them. Milo hesitated for the briefest moment, then stepped away from the dish. He trotted back to the platform, climbed with the clumsy confidence of the very young, and wedged himself once more between Koda's paws. Within seconds, he was curled into that same familiar comma, eyes drifting closed. Emma felt something in her chest loosen that had been tight for a long time. He chose the tiger over the food, over us. Behind them, a door opened, and Dr. Elaine Morris stepped in, coat still dusted with road salts on the drive up. She'd come at Emma's urgent call, half expecting to confirm her original grim assessment. She stared through the glass for a long moment, taking in the sight of Koda watching over the sleeping kitten. "Well," she said at last, voice softer than anyone had heard it before. It would appear my prognosis was incomplete. Outside, the sun pushed a little higher over the ridge, touching the platform with weak winter light. For the first time in 730 mornings, Kitten was not staring past everything toward the far horizon. He was looking down, here, now, at the tiny heartbeat sleeping between his paws. By noon, the story had already slipped beyond the sanctuary's fences. It happened the way so many small disasters start these days, with a phone, a moment, and a feeling that sharing was harmless. One of the part-time groundskeepers, coming off the night shift, had passed the viewing glass just as Kitten tightened his paws around Milo and lowered his head in that impossibly gentle way. The young man had no malice in him. He loved the animals, he loved the internet. He lifted his phone, snapped a picture through the glass, and on his lunch break, posted it with 6 careless words. Silent tiger gets his first friend. No location tag, no mention of Rock Creek. Just a photo of a massive striped cat and a tiny gray kitten tucked between his paws like something out of a children's book. By mid-afternoon, the image had been shared a few dozen times. By evening, it had found its way into a local community group where arguments started under it like slow-burning brush fires. People tagged animal welfare charities, wildlife forums, even a couple of news stations. Someone asked if this was sweet or reckless. Someone else demanded to know what kind of liability insurance a place needed to pull a stunt like that. Emma got the first call from a board member just after dinner. "Tell me this isn't us," he said, skipping any greeting. "It's us," she answered. There was no point pretending otherwise. But it isn't a stunt. It's a containment failure followed by a behavioral miracle. Containment failure is what the lawyers are going to hear, not miracle. We have donors to protect. We have our nonprofit status, our home insurance, our vehicles, staff, everything tied up in this place. One wrong headline, and people will be looking for a personal injury attorney before they ever ask what really happened. Emma knew she wasn't entirely wrong. She'd spent enough nights reading risk assessments and fine print to understand how fragile their safety net really was. You could pay every premium on time, manage every budget like a family juggling credit card payments and retirement savings, and still watch it all crumble because of one bad moment on a stranger's screen. So she laid it out for the board that evening on a video call. The escape through the vent, the first contact, the night of quiet breathing, and way Kotte's body language had stayed soft when it could so easily have turned deadly. She didn't downplay the danger. She didn't gild it either. On the second window of her screen, a representative from the State Wildlife Office listened, jaw set. When Emma finished, he rubbed a hand over his face. "You know how this looks. A predator with live prey in his enclosure, and you chose not to intervene. We chose to watch, and we chose to be ready if watching went wrong." Silence stretched. Someone cleared their throat. At last, the wildlife officer sighed. "You can't keep them like that. Not open, not in full contact, not yet. If this blows up and there's blood on the floor, no amount of good intentions or health insurance is going to fix it. Then give me a middle ground, something between ripping them apart and leaving them completely unsupervised." They found it eventually, an inner barrier, a set of steel bars installed inside Kotte's habitat to divide the space in two. Milo on one side, Kitten on the other. Close enough to see, to smell, to talk in the strange, soft sounds they were trading now, but not close enough to touch. 72 hours, the board agreed. They would monitor stress,
appetite, behavior. If it went badly, separation would be permanent. If it went well, they would decide again. When the call ended, Emma stood alone at the glass, watching the tiger and the kitten sleep. "We bought you time. Let's hope it's enough."
They chose the afternoon feeding to put the plan into motion. Kutta was in the far corner of his habitat, working through a chunk of beef when the service gate slid open and 3 staff members stepped in with the new panels. Heavy steel, powder-coated, the kind of thing rated to hold back a determined predator. From the viewing glass, it looked clinical, like watching a contractor put up a dividing wall in an office instead of in the middle of a life. Jake walked beside the welder, jaw tight. Maya followed with a carrier in her arms, Milo's outraged meows muffled behind the plastic door. "Remember," Emma said quietly, "we do this fast and calm. No shouting, no sudden moves. We don't want him thinking we're a threat to the kitten." Kutta noticed them immediately. He paused mid-chew, lifted his head, and fixed those gold eyes on the carrier. The meat lay forgotten between his paws. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk toward them, shoulders rolling in that soundless way that reminded everyone exactly what he was. Maya's grip on the carrier tightened. Milo scrambled inside, pressing his nose to the grate, little paws shoving, desperate to get to the familiar scent of tiger. "Panels first," Noah murmured. "Get the frame up. Give him a line he can't cross." 2 handlers swung the first section into place, boots scuffing on the concrete. The clang of metal on metal echoed too loudly. Kutta flinched, not from fear, but from memory. For a heartbeat, the light in his eyes went somewhere else, back to a trailer full of cages and fire. Then he stepped forward and put himself between the carrier and the crew. He didn't roar, he didn't lash out, he simply stood there, chest broad, head lowered, body a living shield. Milo went wild, throwing himself against the carrier door, tiny voice raw with protest. "It's okay, big guy," Jake said under his breath, even though Kutta couldn't hear him through the glass. "We're not taking him away, we're trying to keep you both." Piece by piece, the new wall went up. A line of vertical bars, close enough together that a kitten couldn't squeeze through, strong enough that no amount of striped muscle could bend them. When the last bolt was tightened, they created a narrow inner corridor and 2 distinct zones, one for Kutta, one for Milo. Maya opened the carrier with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. Milo shot out like a gray arrow, straight toward Kutta, only to smack nose first into the cold metal of the new barrier. The sound he made then was small, but devastating, a high, confused cry. He climbed, clinging to the bars, reaching through with both front paws, trying to hook Kotta's fur. On the other side, Kutta pressed his muzzle to the steel, whiskers flattening, breath fogging the gap. For hours, that's all they did. They ignored food, ignored toys, ignored everything but each other and the thing that separated them. Milo paced his side of the wall until his paws left faint tracks. Kutta never went back to his platform, never looked at the mountains. He lay down along the bars instead. Great body stretched the length of the divide, one massive paw resting inches from the spot where Milo finally curled up in exhausted sleep. That night, the camera feed showed no peaceful tableau. Just 2 shapes pressed against opposite sides of an unyielding line, breathing in time, kept apart by human fear and human rules.
You couldn't buy a guarantee like that in any life insurance policy, Emma thought bitterly as she watched. All they'd managed to purchase was a different kind of risk. On the second night, just before dawn, Kitten lifted his head and let out a sound none of them had heard before. Not a roar of challenge, not a warning, but a low, aching note that rose and fell like something breaking open inside him. Milo woke instantly, scrambled to the bars, and answered with a hoarse little meow. Steel or not, the message between them was clear. Without each other, they were both incomplete.
By the third day, the numbers on paper finally caught up with what everyone could see through the glass. Dr. Noah stood in the small conference room with a printout in his hand, dark circles under his eyes. On the screen behind him, a still frame showed Kitten and Milo pressed against opposite sides of the bars, noses nearly touching. Appetite down 40% for both, he said. Kotte's cortisol is up nearly a third from his 6-month baseline. Milo's showing stress markers too, over-grooming, pacing, vocalizing. If they were human, I'd be recommending counseling and a change in environment, not more of the same. Emma sat at the head of the table, fingers wrapped around a mug gone cold. On the video screen, the state wildlife officer watched from his office 2 hours away, tie loosened, expression grim. A couple of board members had joined remotely as well, their faces framed by tidy home offices and bookcases full of binders. People who knew how to read risk, whether it was wildlife liability or life insurance policies. So the wall is hurting them, one board member said quietly, but taking it down could hurt us. Taking it down could get that kitten killed, the wildlife officer corrected. Let's be clear. Emma met his gaze through the camera. We've given him something to care about, something to lose. Now we've shown him he can't reach it. Silence settled over the call. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the office window, the same wind that had howled the night Milo first slept between those paws. We do have tools we didn't have 10 years ago, Noah said slowly. Better cameras, motion tracking software. We can monitor body language in real time. We can create escape points for Milo that Kitten physically can't use. There are ways to manage the risk, not pretend it doesn't exist. Like choosing a health insurance plan, one of the older board members murmured. You never get zero risk. You get the best network you can, and then you pray you never need the fine print. Emma almost smiled at that, but didn't. Here's what I'm asking for. We remove the inner bars. We build in redundancies, panic buttons around the perimeter linked directly to the vet station, high-resolution cameras with AI watching for predatory patterns, small escape doors Milo can fit through but Kitten can't, and we get it all in writing with the state. This is a monitored behavioral study, not a stunt. If anything goes wrong, I'll answer for it, personally. That's not how liability works, the wildlife officer said, but his tone had softened. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. You're asking me to sign off on something that's going to make my phone ring off the hook if the wrong photo hits the wrong feed. I'm asking you to let us do our jobs, Emma replied. You asked us to save this tiger. This is what saving him looks like. Another long pause. Someone cleared their throat. Somewhere in the building, a door closed softly. Finally, the officer nodded once. All right, on one condition. Full documentation. Monitoring logs, video archives, incident reports. If you want this to be considered best practice someday, treat it like a case study now. We already are, Noah said. When the call ended, Emma didn't go back to her office. She walked straight down to the viewing glass. Inside, Kitten lay where he had been laying for days. Flank pressed to the bars, Milo sat opposite, tail wrapped around his paws, eyes half closed but stubbornly awake. They looked up together when the service gate opened and the crew stepped in again with tools. This time, we're not putting something between you, Emma murmured. We're taking it away. The bolts gave way with a series of dull metallic clanks. Each panel came down slower than it had gone up, hands more careful now, as if everyone understood they were dismantling more than steel. When the last section was lifted clear, for a heartbeat nothing happened. Then Milo moved. He didn't sprint. He didn't charge. He took 3 small, purposeful steps over the line where the wall had been, ears forward, body low. Kitten lifted his head, uttered that soft, familiar huff, and lowered his massive jaw to the ground. Milo broke into a run. He launched himself up onto Kitten's chest, scrambled over the white fur of his throat, and pressed his whole tiny face into the broad chin as if there had never been a barrier at all. Kitten answered with a rumbling breath that wasn't quite a purr and wasn't quite a growl, something in between that shook the glass in its frame. From the doorway, Noah watched with his hands in his pockets, shoulders tight, ready to move at the first wrong twitch. Emma stood beside him, every sense straining. But nothing went wrong. Kitten's tongue rasped once, carefully, over the kitten's head, flattening his fur in the wrong direction. Milo purred hard, his whole body vibrated. Around them, the habitat was the same concrete and dirt and rock that it had been the day before, yet suddenly it felt like a different place entirely. Reckless? Emma asked. Maybe. Or maybe just, finally, the right risk.
Spring came first, almost shyly. Snow retreated from the edges of the habitat, leaving damp earth and the first stubborn shoots of green. With the inner wall gone, Kitten rediscovered his favorite place, the big flat rock that caught the morning sun. The difference was, he no longer climbed it alone. Most mornings, he went up first, muscles rolling under his coat, tail sweeping behind. Halfway up, he would pause, lower his shoulders, and wait. Milo would scramble after him, sometimes misjudging the distance, paws scrabbling for purchase. When that happened, Kitten shifted just enough for the kitten to use his foreleg as a step. It looked, to everyone watching, exactly like a parent offering a hand to a child. By summer, the sanctuary staff had gotten used to the sight of the odd pair. On hot days, maintenance filled a low plastic pool in Kitten's yard. Tigers aren't always fond of water, but Kitten would wade into his elbows and stand there stone still while Milo splashed around him, batting at floating leaves. Every time the kitten got too close to the deeper edge, Kitten moved slightly, his massive body becoming a living breakwater. Most folks think about home insurance when a storm's coming, Marcus said one afternoon, watching from the path. He's his own policy. In fall, the wind picked up again, scattering leaves like confetti. Milo discovered that if he leapt on Kitten's tail at just the right moment, he could ride it like a slow, striped snake. Kitten tolerated it with a patience no one would have believed a year earlier, flicking his tail only enough to make the game more interesting. It was during this season that Dr. Elaine Morris returned for a formal reassessment. She spent 3 days at Rock Creek, notebook in hand, eyes on the unlikely pair. She watched Kitten scent marking trees using the full height of his habitat, responding when Jake called his name. She watched Milo weave in and out of those huge paws as if they were just another set of warm furniture. On her last afternoon, Elaine stood beside Emma at the viewing glass. Kitten lay on his side, Milo sprawled across his ribs, sound asleep. I used to tell my students some trauma never heals, that the best you can do is manage around it. I may have to update that lecture. Emma smiled, tired and genuine. Life comes at you fast, she said. Like interest rates. Elaine huffed a laugh. Maybe. Or maybe it just takes the right investment. Inside the habitat, Kitten's chest rose and fell, Milo's smaller breaths tucked neatly in between, as if the two of them had agreed on a rhythm the rest of the world could only try to understand. The storm rolled in at dusk, a low growl over the Rockies that sounded too much like distant traffic and bad memories. By full dark, rain was coming in sideways, needling the middle roofs, and the wind had the pine trees bowing like old men in church. Rock Creek had weathered worse, but storms always made Emma think about worst-case scenarios, the same way people do when they finally sit down to look at life insurance or home insurance and realize how much one bad night can cost. In the control room, the monitors glowed in a grid of gray and white. Jake sat with his shoulders hunched, watching the feeds from the big cat row. Occasional flashes of lightning turned the images stark for a heartbeat, like old black and white photographs. "So far so good," Sam said, leaning over his shoulder. "Generators are primed. If the power goes, we can keep cameras and gates running. Noah's on call. We're about as ready as a place like this gets." On screen, Kitten paced the front of his habitat once, then settled near the back wall, close to the access point that led toward the safe room they'd built for Milo. The little cat was a small shadow, darting in and out of the tiger's legs, chasing wind-blown leaves that skittered across the concrete. The first flicker came just after 10. Every monitor popped to black, then back again. The overhead lights dimmed, then steadied. Somewhere, a surge protector beeped an alarm before resetting. "Great," Jake muttered. "Power company's probably juggling half the county. At least our online banking draft for the electric bill cleared yesterday." Another flash of lightning, closer this time, another rumble that shook the windows. On the main screen, the picture from Ktetten's yard fuzzed into static, then resolved in a lower resolution backup feed. The angle was different, off to one side, but still showed most of the habitat. "Backup cam's holding," Sam said. "We're fine." They weren't. Quite. Out in the rain, a section of tarp that helped shield Ktetten's yard from wind tore loose from its moorings. It snapped like a sail, then whipped back, dumping a curtain of water into one corner of the enclosure. In the grainy feed, they saw Milo skitter toward it, trying to chase a piece of debris, and then lose his footing on the slick concrete. The little gray body slid toward the drainage channel, where rainwater had become a narrow, fast-moving stream. "Come on, Kitten. Come on, buddy. See him." Kitten saw him. The tiger surged to his feet and crossed the space in 3 strides, his movement so fast that blurred on the backup camera. Instead of grabbing, he planted himself broadside against the flow, a living dam. Water broke around his forelegs and chest, spraying up in fans. Milo, shaking and plastered with mud, scrabbled against Ktetten's front paw. Kitten dipped his head and shoved, gently but firmly, steering the kitten toward the small, low opening of the cat door that led to the interior safe room they'd built. On screen, they watched Milo stumble through the little hatch and vanish. Kitten stood in the rain a few seconds longer, as if making sure the kitten didn't come tumbling back out, then stepped away from the channel. He shook once, sending droplets flying, and turned his head toward the building where the safe room sat, as if listening for a sound only he could hear. When Jake and Emma reached the interior door and opened the safe room, Milo was there, on the dry straw, soaked to the skin, eyes huge, but alive. He blinked up at them, sneezed, and then began licking his paws with furious dignity. Some folks count on health insurance or a good credit card to get them out of trouble. He's got a tiger. In the yard outside, Kitten settled down by the wall, as close as he could get to the small room where Milo now shivered and purred, and laid his head on his paws. The storm raged on, but inside the sanctuary, something felt steadier than any policy on paper.
The storm passed. The tarps were repaired, and life at Rock Creek slipped back into its odd shared routine. Milo bounced back fast. Within 2 days, he was chasing moths and ambushing Ktetten's tail like nothing had happened, though Emma insisted on a full checkup, just in case. In the exam room, Milo prowled the stainless steel table, sniffing every corner. Dr. Noah lifted him gently, one hand under his chest, the other supporting his hindquarters. Milo protested with a half-hearted meow, then settled, purring as if this were just another game. "Listen to that motor," Jake said from the doorway. "He could power half the sanctuary." "Let's see what's under the hood," Noah replied, reaching for his stethoscope. The room went quiet, except for the faint hum of the air system. Noah's expression shifted as he moved the bell from one side of Milo's chest to the other. He frowned slightly, then adjusted the angle and listened again. Longer this time. "What is it?" Emma asked. "Hold on," he murmured. He switched ears, pressed a little more firmly, eyes narrowing in concentration. When he finally straightened, he didn't move away from Milo. He kept one hand on the kitten's back, absently stroking the soft fur. "There's a murmur," Noah said. "It's not loud, but it's there. The rhythm isn't quite what I'd like." Emma felt that now familiar tightness in her chest. "How bad?" "It could be mild. It could be something he lives with for a long, happy life. But with his history, I'm not going to guess. I want an echocardiogram. We'll bring in a cardiologist from Denver." Jake let out a low whistle. "That's not going to be cheap." Noah gave a tired half smile. "It's a good thing we're a nonprofit and not a family trying to put this on a credit card. Even with health insurance, a lot of people would walk away from a bill like that." Maya, hovering near the sink, swallowed. "So he could... If it's what I think it might be, there's a simple procedure we can do while he's still young. Short surgery, short hospital stay. Fix it now and he never knows the difference. But he'll have to be away from Kutta for several days. No exceptions. We need sterile, quiet, controlled." The word "away" hung in the air like another storm cloud. "He barely handled 3 days behind bars," Jake said. "What's he going to do with a week and no contact at all?" "What's Kutta going to do?" Maya added softly. Nobody had an answer. That night, back at the viewing window, Emma watched the two of them on the platform. Milo was stretched along Kota's chest, head tucked under the tiger's chin. Kota's paw lay across the kitten's back, a gentle, unconscious weight. As Milo slept, his small chest rose and fell a little faster than it should have. Once, his body gave a tiny, involuntary tremor. Kota's paw tightened for a second, as if he'd felt it. "I know," Emma murmured to the glass. "His heart's not quite right. We're going to try to fix it. But to do that, you're both going to have to break all over again for a little while." Kota didn't move, didn't look up at her. He just kept breathing, slow and steady, wrapping his silence around the tiny, flawed heartbeat pressed safely between his paws.
They scheduled the surgery for a Thursday, when the clinic's outside appointments were light, and the Denver cardiologist could make the drive without fighting weekend traffic. The morning of, the sky was clear and brittle, the kind of blue that made the mountains look closer than they were. Milo rode to the medical wing in a soft-sided carrier, a small gray face pressed to the mesh. He didn't fuss much at first. He meowed once when Jake lifted the carrier, once more when they passed through the hallway that led away from the big cat row. By the time they reached the exam room, he had gone quiet in a way that made Emma's stomach knot. Kota knew something was wrong before they even unlatched the service gate. He paced the fence line as they approached, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the carrier in Jake's hands. When the inner door opened and then shut again without Milo reappearing, Kota stopped moving altogether. He stood with his shoulder against the metal, muscles bunched, listening. "Easy, big guy," Jake said under his breath. "He'll be back. This is just maintenance, like taking the car in before your auto insurance gets tested." Kota didn't understand the words, but he understood the empty air where Milo's scent used to be. In the clinic, things moved with practiced efficiency. Anesthesia, monitors, a slim probe tracing images of a tiny, irregular heartbeat onto a screen. The cardiologist pointed out the faulty valve, the slight misflow, the risk if they left it. The repair itself was quick, neat, almost elegant. It looked like nothing, like a few careful motions and a handful of stitches. The hard part started afterward. Milo woke in a recovery cage, woozy and blinking, a shaved patch on his chest marked by a neat line of sutures. His pain was managed, his incision clean, but every time he fully woke, he seemed disoriented, pupils wide, body tense. His heart rate spiked on the monitor, numbers climbing in ragged jumps that made even the seasoned cardiologist frown. "Let me try something," Maya said. She pulled up a file on her phone, a recording Jake had captured weeks before, almost as a joke. Coda standing over Milo, letting out one of those soft, breathy chuffs. Maya held the phone near the cage and pressed play. The sound was faint through the tiny speaker, almost tinny, but unmistakable. Milo's ears flicked, his eyes sharpened. He lifted his head, looking around, then relaxed by degrees, pause unclenching. On the monitor, his heart rate slid down a few notches, not perfect, but better. "Well, I'll be," the cardiologist murmured. "I've seen a lot of treatments, but I've never prescribed tiger noises as cardiac rehab." By the fourth day, everyone was tired. Noah worried about infection, the cardiologist worried about stress, the board worried about donor reports and medical bills. Emma worried about everything at once. Two animals stretched thin at opposite ends of the property, each missing the one thing they couldn't put in any budget or retirement plan. That evening, she stood at the viewing glass and watched Coda, still posted by the gate, his silence heavier than it had been in months. In the distance, beyond the fences and the trees, the mountains sat patient and indifferent. "We said 5 to 7 days," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "We planned it. We justified it. We did everything by the book." Coda lifted his head then, as if he'd heard something, and let out a low, rough sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a cry. Emma closed her eyes. "Maybe it's time to throw the book out," she whispered. They didn't make it to day 7. On the morning of the 5th day, Noah set Milo's chart down on the counter and sighed. The numbers were good, temperature normal, incision clean, heart rhythm steadier with each passing hour. Clinically, the kitten was exactly where they wanted him. Emotionally, everyone could see he was fraying. "He's stable," the cardiologist said. "From a surgical standpoint, I'd be comfortable discharging him to a quiet home with good follow-up." "He doesn't have a quiet home," Emma replied. "He has a tiger." The cardiologist hesitated, then nodded. "You know your animals. I'm just the one who fiddled with his plumbing." He tapped the chart. "If you bring him back, keep the stress low. No chasing, no roughhousing. Think post-op instructions, not circus tricks." "We're done with circuses," Emma said. "You have my word." It was a strange thing, she thought, how similar this felt to the decisions families make every day. When to bring someone home from the hospital. How to balance doctor's orders with the reality of a life that includes barking dogs, clumsy grandchildren, the stress of mortgages and health insurance premiums, and leaking roofs. You do the best you can with the information you have, and you hope the heart, human or otherwise, meets you halfway. They moved Milo back in a hard-sided carrier this time, the kind with a metal door and solid latches. He protested more than he had going in, pawing at the grate, voice thin but determined. Under the faint smell of antiseptic and plastic, his own scent was tinged with something new, the sharp chemical note of surgery, of fear, of somewhere that wasn't Coda. At the big cat row, Coda was already waiting. He paced as they approached, then planted himself by the inner gate, muscles tight, tail low and still. When Jake stepped into the service corridor with the carrier, Coda's head snapped toward the sound. His ears went forward, eyes wide, pupils dark coins. "Easy," Jake murmured, though he couldn't hear him through the steel.
They set the carrier down just inside the habitat and stepped back, leaving the gate closed. Emma nodded once to Noah, who knelt and unlatched the small middle door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Milo's nose appeared at the opening, whiskers twitching. He sniffed the air, blinked in the sudden light, and stepped out. The shaved patch on his chest looked raw against his gray fur, the neat line of sutures stark as thread on cloth. He saw Coda and froze. Time stretched, thin and fragile. 5 days of absence, 5 days of unanswered calling, hung between them like a wire. Coda broke it first. He moved forward one slow step at a time, lowering his head until his nose was level with Milo's ears. He let out a huff, soft and shaking, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath for too long. Milo answered with a rusty, kitten-sized meow that was half greeting, half complaint. Then, he did what he had always done. He ran. He collided with Coda's chest, scrambled up the familiar slope of muscle and fur, and buried his face under the tiger's chin. His purr started like a sputter and built into a steady buzzing motor that seemed far too big for his small body. Coda's eyes closed. For a few seconds, he simply stood there, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and fur and Milo. Then something deep in his chest shifted. The sound that came out of him next was nothing like the soft chuffs they had heard before. It started low, a vibration in the ground, rose through his ribs and rolled out into the air as a full, rich roar. Jake flinched instinctively, every memory of warning signs and safety drills lighting up at once. But there was no aggression in it, no sharp, jagged edge. This was not the roar Coda had given trainers in a ring, or fire in a truck, or strangers on a roadside. It was a proclamation. I am here. He is mine. We are still alive. The roar bounced off concrete and fencing, carried down the row, out toward the parking lot, up toward the indifferent mountains. In the medical wing, a few loose items rattled on shelves. In the office, Emma's coffee cup trembled where she had set it down hours before. Milo didn't flinch. Tucked under that great striped chin, he kept right on purring, as if the sound outside was nothing more than a passing truck. When the echo finally faded, Coda lowered his head and very carefully, almost reverently, placed one paw over Milo's back. Not pinning, not trapping, just resting there. A weight. A promise. For 730 days, his silence meant emptiness, a withdrawal from a world that had taken too much. Today, it meant something else. He had found his voice again, and he was using it to say, I will not lose this.
It started small, the way most big things do. Emma agreed to a short feature for Whispering Hearts, a 10-minute video about a traumatized tiger and the kitten who somehow brought him back. No dramatic music, no staged shots, just the security footage, some daytime clips, and a few quiet interviews. She wanted people to see what had really happened, not some polished ads slotted between life insurance commercials and political arguments. They uploaded it on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, the view count had already blown past anything the channel had seen before. Comments came in from everywhere: Denver, Des Moines, Florida, a retired teacher in Maine who said she watched it twice before bed and again with her coffee. People wrote about their own rescues, their own broken pets, their own attempts to heal from things that didn't show up on any health insurance form. One woman said she'd been arguing with her husband all week about money, the mortgage, home insurance going up again, a leaking roof they couldn't quite afford to fix. Then she saw Coda and Milo. If a tiger and a shelter kitten can figure out how to make room for each other, she wrote, maybe we can find room in the budget for one small donation. The state wildlife officer came back up to Rock Creek, not with a clipboard full of violations, but with a legal pad covered in questions. He spent an entire afternoon in the control room watching archived footage with Noah and Elaine, pausing to ask about a particular twitch of Coda's tail,
or the way Milo seemed to orbit him like a small, furry planet. "This isn't just a feel-good story," Elaine told him. "This is a case study in social buffering, cross-species attachment, trauma recovery. If we had human patients with progress like this, we'd be writing grant proposals by now." He nodded slowly. "You realize other sanctuaries are going to call me," he said. "Ask why I let you do what I told them not to try." "Then tell them the truth," Emma replied. "We had the right animals, the right setup, and a lot of sleepless nights. This isn't a trick you pull out between car insurance ads, it's a commitment." At the end of the year, the Rock Creek board met in person, coats draped over the backs of chairs, coffee cups scattered among financial reports and donor letters. On the screen at one end of the room, a still image showed Coda on his platform, Milo draped across his paws, both of them looking straight into the camera as if mildly surprised to be caught. "The data are clear," Noah said. "Coda's activity level is up, his stress hormones are down, Milo's heart is holding steady. Behaviorally, they're bonded. Separating them now wouldn't be management, it would be cruelty." The vote to classify them officially as a bonded pair, a family unit for all practical purposes, was unanimous. After the meeting, Emma went back to her office and sorted through a stack of mail that had been growing on the corner of her desk. Most of it was what you'd expect: brochures, grant paperwork, a cheerful flyer from the bank about online banking security and low-interest credit card offers. Near the bottom of the pile, she found a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded twice. The handwriting was shaky, the ink a little smeared. "I saw your video," it read. "I think the kitten you called Milo was mine. I left him at your gate because I lost my job and my apartment. I was behind on everything: rent, utilities, even my car payment. I couldn't afford his shots, let alone an emergency vet. I thought I was abandoning him. I didn't know I was giving a tiger a reason to live. Thank you for doing what I couldn't." Emma sat for a long time with that letter in her lap, listening to the faint sounds of the sanctuary settling for the night. Out past the windows, beyond the offices and the fences and the careful systems people build to feel safe, a tiger and a small gray cat were climbing onto their evening platform, taking their usual places. The world knew their names now. But inside the enclosure, it was still simple. One large heartbeat, one small, and the space between them filled with something no policy, no plan, and no amount of money could ever quite guarantee.
On a mild April morning, the kind that makes winter feel like a half-remembered story, Coda lay on his favorite rock with the mountains spread out in front of him like a painting. The air was cool, but not sharp, touched with the smell of pine and thawing earth. A light breeze moved through the sanctuary, rattling the chain link just enough to remind you it was there. Between Coda's front paws, right where he'd first appeared that long ago night, Milo slept. The kitten wasn't so tiny now. His body had filled out, his coat had grown thick and sleek, and the shaved patch on his chest was just a faint ghost of lighter fur. But in sleep, he still curled into that familiar comma, nose tucked against Coda's leg, as if the big tiger were the only pillow in the world that made sense. From the viewing glass, Emma watched them in the quiet. There were no visitors yet, no school groups, no clipboards or cameras, just her, the rock, the tiger, the cat, and the mountains. Coda's eyes were half closed, not empty the way they had once been, but soft, content. Every now and then he blinked slowly, looking from the distant ridgeline down to the small shape at his feet, as if comparing two very different kinds of horizon. A fly buzzed close to Milo's ear. The kitten twitched, made a small sound, and shifted in his sleep. Without really waking, Coda moved his paw, laying it gently across Milo's back. The weight was careful, practiced, heavy enough to anchor, light enough that the little chest beneath it could rise and fall without strain. Out in the world beyond Rock Creek,
People still argued about money and mortgages and whether their life insurance or health insurance was good enough. Bills came due, roofs leaked, credit card statements showed up with numbers higher than anyone liked. The usual human worries marched on. Inside the enclosure, none of that existed. What existed was a tiger who had once stood in fire and steel and decided never to speak again, and a kitten who had been left at a gate in a plastic basket when someone ran out of options. Two hearts that by any logical measure should have drifted past each other without ever touching. Instead, they had become family. Emma thought of the first night, of Koda's great head bending over that impossibly small scrap of fur, of the first soft huff after 730 days of silence. She thought of the storm, the bars, the surgery, the roar that shook the windows but didn't carry any threat. Most of all, she thought of how, somewhere along the way, the question had shifted. It was no longer, will he ever be the tiger he used to be? But who has he chosen to be now? On the rock, Milo sighed and stretched all four legs, still asleep, pressing more firmly into Koda's paw. The tiger adjusted, a small, instinctive movement to keep him close. His breathing stayed slow and steady. Milo's purr, barely audible even through the glass, blended into that rhythm like a second line of music under the first. If you didn't know their story, you might have walked past and seen only two animals resting in the sun. But if you did know, if you remembered the wreck, the flames, the empty 2 years, the night a kitten slipped through a vent, it was impossible not to see something more. For 730 days, silence had meant absence for Koda, a life put in neutral, a soul idling far from the present. Now, as the breeze lifted his whiskers and the small body under his paw rose and fell in trust, that same silence meant something very different. It meant that there was nothing left to prove. No roar required, no performance demanded. Just a tiger, a cat, and a quiet morning, where for once nothing hurt and nothing was missing. Far above them, the mountains kept their own long, patient vigil. On the rock below, a once broken heart and a once abandoned one beat in easy, unremarkable synchrony. The tiger who had been silent for 730 days finally had all the words he needed, folded into a single, simple truth. He was not alone anymore, and neither was the tiny kitten sleeping between his paws.